When I began to embrace the parts of myself that didn't fit neatly into society's expectations, I realized that these so-called mad or strange aspects were actually my greatest strengths. Growing up, I was told to follow the rules, blend in, and conform. But I always felt this itch, this pull towards something different, something outside the lines. At first, I resisted it because, like most people, I craved acceptance. I wanted to belong, to be understood, and to fit into the world as it was. But the more I tried to conform, the more I felt disconnected from my true self. I was hiding parts of myself that were screaming to be let out. It took time for me to realize that the very things that made me feel different, that made me feel like I didn't belong, were the things that held the key to my uniqueness. Instead of seeing my difference as a flaw, I began to see it as a source of power. I started to ask myself, why should I fit into a world that doesn't fully understand me? Why should I suppress my creativity, my unconventional thoughts, and my radical ideas just to make others comfortable? And so I decided to embrace the madness within me. By doing this, I unlocked a level of freedom I never knew existed. I no longer cared about what others thought. I stopped seeking validation from external sources, stopped worrying about being labeled as strange or abnormal. Instead, I began to trust my own instincts, my own inner voice. I realized that the world often tries to box people into categories, to label them, because that makes them easier to control. But I refused to be boxed in. I refused to let society define who I should be or how I should think. That decision changed everything for me. Once I let go of the need to conform, I found that my mind became a wellspring of creativity and potential. It was like I had been living with the brakes on my entire life, and now I had finally taken my foot off the pedal. Ideas began to flow freely. I saw the world differently. I saw possibilities where others saw obstacles. I stopped following the rules and started creating my own. I became fearless in my pursuit of what felt true to me, even if it didn't make sense to anyone else. That's when I realized thinking differently isn't about being rebellious for the sake of rebellion. It's about being true to myself, no matter what. Thinking differently doesn't come without its challenges. There's discomfort, of course, because stepping outside of societal norms means stepping outside of your comfort zone. But I began to realize that comfort is a trap. It keeps you safe, sure, but it also keeps you small, and I didn't want to live small anymore. So I embraced the discomfort. I let myself entertain ideas that others would dismiss as impractical, irrational, or even impossible. I realized that the greatest minds throughout history, those who changed the world, didn't do so by staying comfortable. They did it by embracing their own madness, by challenging the status quo, and by daring to think differently. I started to thrive in chaos. Where most people see chaos as something to avoid or manage, I see it as an opportunity. It wasn't always this way. Like everyone else, I used to be afraid of the unknown. I used to crave control, stability, and predictability. But life doesn't work that way. Life is unpredictable, chaotic, and ever-changing. And for a long time, that reality terrified me. I would try to hold on to control with a white-knuckled grip, planning everything, trying to manage every aspect of my life. But no matter how hard I tried, chaos always found its way in, and every time it did, it threw me off balance. I reached a point where I had to make a decision. Either keep fighting against the chaos, trying to maintain control, or learn to live within it. I chose the latter. The moment I stopped trying to control everything, the moment I accepted that chaos is a natural part of life, I found a sense of freedom. I realized that within chaos, there is opportunity. When things are falling apart, when the predictable structures of life are crumbling, there's a space to create something new. Chaos breaks down the old, making room for the new to emerge. Chaos pushes me out of my comfort zone, and that's where I grow. It strips away the illusion of control and forces me to adapt, to think on my feet, to come up with creative solutions that I wouldn't have considered if everything had gone according to plan. It's in those moments of uncertainty that I've discovered my greatest strengths. I've learned to be resilient, to be flexible, and to trust in my ability to navigate whatever life throws my way. I stopped seeing chaos as a threat and started seeing it as a catalyst for transformation. Once I embraced chaos, I realized that most people don't know how to handle it. They become vulnerable, scared, and paralyzed by fear when things don't go according to plan. That's where I found my advantage. In those moments of chaos, when everyone else is scrambling, I'm at my best. I'm calm, focused, and adaptable. I can see opportunities where others see disaster. I can move forward when others are stuck. By thriving in chaos, I've gained a distinct edge, a kind of strength that most people never develop because they are too focused on maintaining the status quo. The key to thriving in chaos is adaptability. Chaos doesn't follow a script, and neither do I. The more flexible I am, the more I can pivot when circumstances change. I've learned that being rigid, trying to hold on to old ways of thinking or doing things, only leads to frustration and failure. But when I'm open to change, when I'm willing to flow with whatever comes my way, I find opportunities that others miss. Chaos is unpredictable, but that unpredictability can work in my favor if I'm willing to embrace it. To thrive in chaos, I also had to cultivate fearlessness. Fear is a natural response to uncertainty, but I've learned not to let it control me. In fact, I've learned to use fear as a compass. When something scares me, it usually means I'm on the right track. Fear is a sign that I'm stepping into the unknown, that I'm pushing past my comfort zone. And that's where the magic happens. That's where I grow. I used to be paralyzed by fear, like so many people. I would hesitate, second-guess myself, and miss out on opportunities because I was too afraid to take the leap. But once I realized that fear is just a part of the process, that it's not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced, I became unstoppable. I stopped waiting for the fear to go away, and I started moving forward despite it. The more risks I took, the more I realized that fear wasn't the enemy. It was just a signal that I was growing, that I was evolving. Taking risks doesn't mean being reckless. It means being willing to step into the unknown, to challenge myself, and to face the possibility of failure. I've failed many times, but I've never let those failures define me. Instead, I see them as stepping stones. Every failure teaches me something new, pushes me to grow, and gets me closer to my goal. I've learned to see failure not as a dead end, but as a necessary part of the journey. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that the only real failure is the failure to try. The fear of failure used to hold me back, but once I started taking risks, once I stopped being afraid of the unknown, I realized that most of my fears were unfounded. The things I was most afraid of never happened, and even when they did, I found that I was strong enough to handle them. Each time I took a risk and failed, I got back up stronger, more determined, and more resilient. Fearlessness, for me, is about refusing to be limited by what others think. It's about not letting society's expectations dictate my actions. I don't measure my success by conventional standards. I don't care about fitting in or being liked. I care about being true to myself, about pursuing my vision with unwavering determination. When I stopped worrying about failure, about what others would think, I unlocked a sense of freedom that has allowed me to take bold, unapologetic action. This fearlessness has given me a kind of magnetic power. The more I embrace my true self, the more I inspire others to do the same. People are drawn to confidence, to those who aren't afraid to stand out and take risks. I've found that when I live fearlessly, when I'm unapologetically myself, I not only create a life that's true to me, but I also give others permission to do the same. Mastering psychology, both my own and others, has been one of the most powerful tools I've ever developed. It's not just about understanding people on a surface level, but diving deep into the hidden motivations, fears, desires, and insecurities that drive behavior. The more I've studied human psychology, the more I've realized how predictable people can be. Most of us operate based on unconscious patterns formed early in life. We react to the world not with clarity or mindfulness, but with a series of programmed responses. Understanding this has given me a distinct advantage because once you can predict how someone will react, you can influence them in ways they don't even realize. But before I could master the psychology of others, I had to master my own mind. This was no easy task. It required me to take a hard, unflinching look at myself, my thoughts, my beliefs, my fears, and my motivations. I had to strip away the layers of conditioning that had built up over time. Society conditions us to think a certain way, to act according to a set of rules that we don't even question. And because of that, most of us walk through life on autopilot, following these invisible scripts without even realizing it. But I decided to break free from that conditioning. I began by developing a heightened level of self-awareness. This wasn't a comfortable process. It's easy to coast through life without ever truly examining who we are or why we do what we do. But I knew that if I wanted to unlock my full potential, I had to confront every part of myself, even the parts I didn't like. I started paying close attention to my thoughts, noticing the patterns that would emerge. I became acutely aware of the limiting beliefs that were holding me back, the fears that kept me from taking bold action, and the insecurities that made me doubt myself. This process of self-discovery was both painful and liberating. It was painful because it forced me to face parts of myself that I had been avoiding for years. I had to confront my weaknesses, my past mistakes, and my unresolved fears. But it was liberating because once I became aware of these things, they no longer controlled me. I realized that awareness was the first step toward change. Once I understood what was driving my behavior, I could start to take control of it. Instead of reacting unconsciously to the world around me, I began to make conscious choices about how I wanted to think, feel, and act. This newfound self-awareness gave me a level of mental clarity and emotional control that I had never experienced before. I learned how to manage my emotions instead of letting them control me. Emotions are powerful forces that can drive us to make impulsive decisions or hold us back from taking necessary risks. Most people are slaves to their emotions, reacting to situations based on how they feel in the moment, rather than what's actually best for them. But I didn't want to be like most people. I wanted to be in control of my mind, and that meant learning to master my emotions. Emotional mastery doesn't mean suppressing or ignoring how you feel. It means understanding your emotions, recognizing where they come from, and choosing how to respond to them. I began to notice the subtle triggers that would cause me to feel fear, anger, or frustration. Instead of reacting impulsively, I would pause, observe the emotion, and then decide how to respond. This gave me an incredible sense of power because I was no longer a victim of my emotional impulses. I could stay calm and focused, even in the most chaotic or stressful situations. But mastering my own psychology was only part of the equation. The real advantage came when I started to understand the psychology of others. People are far more predictable than they realize. Most of us are driven by the same fundamental needs: the need for approval, the fear of rejection, the desire for success, and the avoidance of failure. Once I understood these core drivers, I was able to anticipate how people would react in almost any situation. I began to see the subtle cues that reveal what someone is really thinking or feeling, even when they try to hide it. For example, body language is a powerful indicator of what's going on beneath the surface. People may say one thing with their words, but their bodies often tell a completely different story. I started paying attention to the small, often overlooked details, the way someone shifts in their seat when they're uncomfortable, the quick flash of anxiety in their eyes when they feel threatened, or the subtle tightening of their lips when they're holding back what they really want to say. These small cues gave me invaluable insights into their true thoughts and emotions. Once I could read these cues, I realized that I could influence outcomes by playing to these psychological tendencies. I don't manipulate people for the sake of manipulation, but I do use my understanding of psychology to navigate situations in a way that benefits me. If I know what someone wants, I can position myself in a way that makes it easier for them to give me what I want. If I can sense their fear or insecurity, I can diffuse it before it becomes an obstacle. Understanding psychology isn't about tricking people. It's about knowing how to align their needs and motivations with my goals. Another powerful tool I've developed is the ability to evoke specific emotional responses in others. People are driven by their emotions far more than they realize. Logic and reason can only get you so far, but if you can tap into someone's emotions, you can influence them in ways that logic never could. I've learned how to use this to my advantage, whether it's by evoking fear to create urgency, tapping into someone's desire for approval to gain their trust, or stoking ambition to get them to take bold action. This level of influence requires more than just observation. It requires deep empathy and understanding. I had to learn to step outside my own perspective and truly understand the world from someone else's point of view. This meant letting go of my own biases and assumptions and really listening to what people were saying, not just their words, but the deeper, often unspoken desires behind them. I had to learn to put myself in their shoes, to feel what they were feeling, and to understand what was driving them. The more I developed this skill, the more I realized how powerful it could be. People want to be understood. They want to feel seen and heard. And when you can give them that, they open up to you in ways they never would otherwise. By truly understanding someone's psychology, I could influence them without them even realizing it. I could guide conversations in the direction I wanted them to go. I could anticipate their objections before they raise them, and I could navigate around potential conflicts with ease. This mastery of psychology extends beyond just influencing individual interactions. It has also allowed me to understand group dynamics and societal patterns. People are not just influenced by their own internal psychology. They are also deeply affected by the environment around them. Social pressure, cultural norms, and group dynamics all play a role in shaping behavior. By understanding how these external forces influence people, I've been able to predict and influence larger trends and outcomes. For example, I've learned that people often conform to the expectations of those around them. Most individuals are afraid to stand out, to go against the grain, because they fear rejection or judgment. This need for social acceptance can be a powerful tool. If I can create an environment where certain behaviors are rewarded or validated, people will naturally gravitate toward those behaviors, even if they might not have done so on their own. The ability to shape group dynamics, to influence the psychology of a crowd, is one of the most powerful tools anyone can possess. It's why leaders who understand psychology can sway entire movements, why marketers who understand human nature can sell almost anything, and why those who master their own minds can rise to the top in any field. I've seen firsthand how this level of mastery can turn the tide in almost any situation, from personal relationships to business negotiations to public influence. In the end, mastering psychology is about gaining a deep understanding of the human condition. It's about recognizing that every person, no matter how complex they seem on the surface, is driven by a core set of emotions and needs. By understanding these drivers, I can anticipate their actions, influence their decisions, and shape the world in ways that serve my goals. This mastery has made me unstoppable because it gives me the power to navigate any situation with precision and control. In a world where most people are just reacting to their emotions, I've learned how to use mine and theirs to my advantage. The moment I realized I could create my own narrative was a pivotal turning point in my life. Up until that point, I had been living according to the expectations and scripts handed to me by others. Society, family, teachers, even friends. We're all born into a world where we're told what success looks like, what happiness is, what kind of person we should be. These narratives are ingrained in us from a young age, and for a long time, I followed them blindly, thinking that was the only way to live. But as time went on, I began to feel suffocated by those external definitions of who I was supposed to be. I realized I didn't fit neatly into any of the boxes I had been placed in. And more importantly, I didn't want to. The first step toward creating my own narrative was recognizing the stories I had been told about myself, stories that weren't necessarily true, but that I had internalized as if they were. These stories came from many sources: parents who had their own vision of what my life should look like, a school system that measured my worth based on grades and conformity, and a society that placed value on external achievements like money, status, and approval. I had been conditioned to believe that success meant following a certain path: go to school, get a good job, climb the corporate ladder, and accumulate material wealth. But the more I followed that path, the more unfulfilled I felt. I had to unlearn those stories. I had to strip away the layers of conditioning and start asking myself the hard questions. Who am I, really? What do I want out of life? What does success look like to me, not according to the definitions handed to me by others? This process of self-exploration was uncomfortable at first. It's hard to break free from the narratives that have been drilled into your head for years. But I knew that if I didn't, I would be living someone else's version of my life. not my own. As I began to unravel those old stories, I realized that I had the power to write my own. I didn't have to follow the script that had been handed to me. I could create a new one, a narrative that reflected my true values, passions, and desires. This realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. On the one hand, it meant that I was responsible for my own life in a way I hadn't been before. I could no longer blame society or my upbringing or anyone else for the choices I made. On the other hand, it gave me a level of freedom I had never experienced. I was no longer bound by the limitations imposed by others. I was free to define my own reality. I began to take ownership of my life in a way that felt both empowering and liberating. I stopped comparing myself to others, stopped measuring my worth by external standards, and started focusing on what truly mattered to me. The more I let go of societal expectations, the more I discovered my own unique path. And the more I embraced that path, the more authentic and fulfilled I felt. One of the most important realizations I had during this process was that my past didn't have to define me. For years, I had allowed my past experiences, especially my failures and mistakes, to shape how I saw myself. I carried the weight of those experiences like a burden, believing they limited what I could achieve in the future. But I realized that the past is just a story. And like any story, it can be rewritten. I didn't have to be defined by where I came from. I could choose to define myself by where I was going. This shift in mindset was incredibly liberating. I no longer felt trapped by my history, my traumas, or the expectations of those around me. I realized that I had the power to reinvent myself at any moment, to start fresh and create a new narrative that was aligned with who I was becoming, not who I had been. It was like I had been given a blank canvas and I could paint whatever picture I wanted. My past didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the story I was creating in the present and how I was shaping my future. As I crafted this new narrative, I began to embrace my uniqueness. I stopped trying to fit into molds that weren't made for me and started celebrating the things that made me different. I realized that the very things I had once seen as weaknesses or flaws, my unconventional thinking, my willingness to challenge authority, my refusal to follow the crowd, were actually my greatest strengths. These were the qualities that set me apart, that made me who I was. And once I stopped hiding them, once I stopped apologizing for them, I found that they became a source of incredible power. Living authentically, embracing my uniqueness, wasn't always easy. There were times when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was making the right choices by going against the grain. The pressure to conform is real, and it can be overwhelming at times. But I knew that if I didn't stay true to myself, I would never be happy. I would always be living someone else's life, chasing someone else's definition of success. So I kept pushing forward, even when it felt uncomfortable, even when others didn't understand my choices. As I continued to craft my own narrative, I began to attract opportunities that aligned with my true self. Doors opened that I hadn't even known were there, and people who resonated with my authenticity started showing up in my life. It was as if the universe was responding to my decision to live in alignment with who I really was. The more I embraced my uniqueness, the more magnetic I became, drawing in experiences and relationships that were a reflection of my true self. One of the most profound shifts I experienced during this process was the realization that I was no longer seeking approval from others. For so long, I had looked to external sources, family, friends, society, for validation. I had measured my worth based on how others saw me, on whether they approved of my choices. But as I started to live my own narrative, I stopped caring about what others thought. I realized that the only approval I needed was my own. I was no longer living for anyone else. I was living for me. This level of self-acceptance was incredibly freeing. I no longer felt the need to explain myself or justify my choices. I didn't need others to understand or agree with my path because I knew it was right for me. And once I stopped seeking external validation, I found a level of inner peace and confidence that I had never known before. I was no longer swayed by the opinions of others. I was grounded in my own truth. Creating my own narrative also meant taking full responsibility for my life. I could no longer blame external circumstances or other people for where I was. I had to own my choices, my actions, and my outcomes. This wasn't always easy. There were times when I made mistakes, when things didn't go as planned, and it would have been tempting to point fingers or make excuses. But I knew that if I wanted to be truly empowered, I had to take full ownership of my life. I had to recognize that I was the creator of my reality, and that meant taking responsibility for both my successes and my failures. This level of ownership required courage and resilience. It meant facing challenges head-on, knowing that I had the power to overcome them. It meant refusing to be a victim of my circumstances, and instead seeing every obstacle as an opportunity to grow. The more I took ownership of my life, the more unstoppable I became. I realized that I had the power to shape my reality, to create the life I wanted, regardless of the obstacles in my way. In the end, creating my own narrative has been one of the most empowering things I've ever done. It has given me a sense of freedom, authenticity, and power that I never knew was possible. I no longer feel constrained by the expectations of others or the limitations of my past. I am the author of my own story, and I have the power to rewrite it as many times as I need to. This realization has made me unstoppable because I know that I am in control of my destiny. I'm no longer living someone else's life. I am living my own, and that is the greatest power of all.